Be on with you in a minute or two. Talk amongst yourselves. Uh-oh, they're bringing out a different TV. Oh, no.
So we can see the Zoomers.
No, we want to see her.
Oh,
And this is where the power
yeah.
would be, right? So the hard part with this is the extension cord. We don't need to do the Zoom, we need to do the PowerPoint. Yeah, this is gonna be the PowerPoint, where they get the PowerPoint. Because that one's hardwired for other stuff. We need the extension cord, because usually I do get it.
I can get one.
Would you? Thank you. If you,
And if we're gonna have Kathy at the podium, we should have the TV probably very close to her so that the
well,
camera.
or I could just stand over here. Well, is
Well,
there?
The camera.
Okay.
Got it. Well, but you know, that could be like there, because the people on screen, oh,
I'd like to zoom in on it so that
Yeah.
YouTube.
Yep, you tell us where you want it.
okay.
Yeah, get it as tight as possible so that I can zoom in as close as possible, because that's, what, for the people online, all they're gonna see is the camera zooming in on the TV.
Oh. Won't this be the image you'll get on the square? You'll share from here?
Zoom, yes, but you talk about YouTube, right?
Yeah, I'm sharing the YouTube feed via Zoom. If somebody else can share this thing in the middle, well, but then we're not gonna have any sound.
Yeah.
So if we want the narration with the video,
Yeah, the video, though, is already up on your screen.
I'm sorry, yes,
Yeah.
but, so that camera is what is being streamed. And the only way to
Yep.
see the PowerPoint is by looking at that
Yep.
screen, so I wanna be able to zoom in
Yep.
on it as closely as possible.
But we could share this on, but not to YouTube.
Well, and if we shared that to, so if we shared that to Zoom, then nobody would hear Kathy anymore, right? Unless you have
Yeah.
the microphone on in here.
Okay. Yeah.
So is that close enough? You want it closer?
It would be right next to you.
Yeah, it's okay. It can come closer.
Yeah, as close as you can get it without tripping over it,
Well, but if it's a little bit behind me,
that should be okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. See how that does for you.
I'll check the, I'll
And
zoom
you've
in.
got the TV or the laptop then?
See the one, right?
She did that.
Oh, you did that. Oh, you're good. By the
Should
way,
there's
your
a little-
organizing list was delightful. Oh my God.
Except I didn't put time in there for technical issues.
As long as I don't have to run Zoom, I can do a PowerPoint on this. Do you have,
The right kind of cord for it.
I have an HDMI thing,
Okay.
so I have a little,
This is the HDMI one, so if you want to know where that goes, I can do this. What is? Is that looking good?
Yep.
Yep. How are we doing? And then this is.
We just need to make sure she's got access to the, so the PowerPoint was emailed to us at their Yahoo
This looks like this.
on April 30th. Just search for Kathy's last name and scroll down. It should be the one. Oh.
That's okay.
It's okay.
Because it's the same one. Remember that, what is it, called the month? Is it Christmas one? Yeah.
Taking forever.
All right. Go ahead and introduce you. All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Memorial United Church of Christ. I'm Jill Carlson, a member here, and also a member of the Memorial Green Team. Our Green Team offers ideas and activities to care for the earth, as Memorial is a creation justice church that welcomed Earth as a member in 2021. Our speaker, Kathy Kuntz, is presented by the Memorial Green Team. After Kathy's presentation, she will hold a Q&A to respond to your questions, and for people on Zoom, please send your questions in via the chat feature. I'll come around with a microphone to the people in the room that have questions so that they can be heard by others in the room and also on Zoom. So to introduce Kathy, Kathy is the director of the Dane County Office of Climate Change, Energy and Climate Change. Kathy aims to make it easy for everyone in Dane County to make choices that help achieve the county's ambitious climate goals. She has almost 30 years of experience helping businesses and residents adopt sustainable practices. Prior to joining Dane County, Kathy led Cool Choices, where she worked with local governments and private businesses on sustainability efforts, and has also led Focus on Energy, Wisconsin's statewide energy efficiency and renewable energy program. Kathy is here tonight to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act and how federal tax credits and incentives can help you pay for clean energy projects. Please welcome Kathy. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you so much. That probably works. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So it's great to be here tonight with all of you, talking about the really big opportunities in front of us in terms of federal funding. So as Jill said, I'm with the Office of Energy and Climate Change, and we're a relatively new part of county government. County Executive Joe Parisi established our office in 2017 really to do two things: to lead efforts to green internal county operations, and a lot of that had been going on for a long time. I would say we're really supporting those efforts. You might have heard we achieved 100% renewable offset of our electric use in county operations just recently with the completion of a solar project, so we're pretty excited about that. So we're thinking about our internal work, but we're also really focused on county-wide efforts, and that's where we wrote the county-wide climate action plan, and we've been doing a variety of things to sort of help everyone in Dane County. A lot of our work is partnership to achieve those bigger climate goals. Next slide. So it's in that context that we now have this federal opportunity, and the federal opportunity in front of us is really about two big federal bills. The first bill was the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that happened in 2021. And that's a very traditional piece of federal legislation in that it sets up new programs and allocates big chunks of money to states and local governments, and there's sort of a traditional bureaucracy about how that flows through our processes. In 2022, Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, and that's not a very typical federal piece of legislation. So it's much more money for climate action, and 2/3 of the money is tax credits and direct pay to nonprofits. And so instead of being money they set an amount of money and send it to the state and negotiate how the state spends it, tax credits are, they say, anyone who does this gets a tax credit. And the tax credits are essentially unlimited. If we do more projects, more tax credits happen. It's a bigger opportunity, and it's an opportunity that individuals can make happen whether or not their states move forward on bigger kind of projects with the federal government. So it's like an exciting opportunity for a state like Wisconsin, where we don't always have state level support for accelerating climate action. Well, now everybody can make that happen on their own because there's federal funding to make it happen. Sort of a way to think about that. So mostly I'm going to talk about the IRA. And in that context, we think the IRA is a huge deal, and so our office has set up a whole new set of web pages that are just about the federal funding. And essentially, we know that this is an exciting opportunity, but it can be kind of overwhelming to go to U.S. Treasury websites and try to figure out which of these things am I thinking about for my house. So what we're doing here is really trying to make everything really simple, to have all the links in one places. We send out email alerts you can subscribe to, lots of sort of opportunities to really, again, make it easier for people to take advantage of these opportunities. Next slide. So on the residential side, as homeowners, there's a bunch of new tax credits here. There are, and they're kind of fall into different buckets. So for solar, battery storage, geothermal, things that the federal government considers renewable energy, is sort of the best set of tax credits. So those are 30% of the project cost with no cap. Okay, however big your project is, you get 30%. And that tax credit you can extend into future years. So a tax credit works against the tax you owe in a year. So if when you're preparing your taxes, you know, you get to that line where it says the total tax you owe for the year is $5,000, then the maximum credit you could take for that year is $5,000 because it has to be your tax liability. And that doesn't matter if you like overpaid that amount or underpaid, you know, that's that amount owed before they say this is what you've already withheld and this is what you owe. With the renewable credits though, if your credit is bigger than your tax liability, you can extend that credit into future years of your tax. So if you did a solar project where you ended up with a $9,000 tax credit and your liability was only $5,000 this year, you could put the other $4,000 against your taxes next year, which is sort of like the sweetest of all tax credits. Okay, so that's the renewable one. The efficiency one is good, but it's not quite as good. You know, you get 30% of eligible costs, and there's lots of things that are eligible here, but there's an annual cap of $1,200. So but you can do that $1,200 credit every year. And there's a separate cap on heat pumps of $2,000. So you could this year get an energy audit and get a 30% credit on that, and maybe the energy audit said you really need insulation as your first thing to do, insulation and air sealing. You could do that this year in addition to the energy audit and get the credits on that. And then, you know, there might be another recommendation about replacing your air conditioner with a heat pump down the road that you do 2 years later or something. You know, you can, because the tax credits are here for 10 years. Okay, that's the other important thing, that these were set up to be stable for 10 years, which is a really important feature. The trick, of course, about tax credits is you claim that credit the year after you do the work on your taxes. Now that process, I think, works fine for households that have the income to do the project, but it isn't a very good solution for low-income folks who we know often need these energy efficiency measures to like make their energy bills more affordable. So there's another feature of the IRA. And that is 2 new rebate programs that will be funded through the IRA that here in Wisconsin we're going to run through the Focus on Energy program, which is really good news. Every state doesn't have a Focus on Energy program. We have a statewide infrastructure to deliver these rebates. These programs are not up and running yet, and probably won't be until 2024. One of the programs will do whole house energy efficiency, and the other will be around electrification. And both programs are really have larger incentives for low-income households, and some like high-end income require, so the electrification one, if you make more than 150% of area median income, you can't get any incentives under it. In the next 6 to 8 weeks, the federal government is going to send all the states the guidance for these programs, and then every state's going to have to figure out exactly how they're going to interpret that guidance and send it back and get it approved. And, everyone sort of involved in Focus on Energy is saying they really want to see that program roll out in early 2024. So right now, the tax credits are the best opportunity for homeowners, but when these new programs roll out, particularly because they're targeted at more low-income folks, we're going to be spending a lot of time with our partners. We want everyone to be our partner, thinking about how we reach those low-income households and make sure folks know about these new programs so that they can get some of those benefits. So that's why I even mention that program now. Next slide. I want to say a little bit about energy efficiency because, most of us, if we've lived in Wisconsin a long time, we grew up in old drafty houses in the Midwest, and we don't have very high expectations for our homes. And so I want to just all of us probably have energy efficiency opportunities. This article over here is from Minnesota. The city of Minneapolis has, about 2 years ago, they passed an ordinance that when a house is sold, there has to be an energy audit. And so looking at the first 2 years of energy audit data, 2/3 of the homes in Minneapolis are under-insulated. And the reporter in this story was like, can you believe it? And as someone who's worked in energy efficiency, my answer is yes. 2/3 of the homes in our communities are under-insulated too. I mean, we didn't even have building codes until the 1980s. So there was no rule about any of that before that. And it took us a while to really get energy efficiency right in our codes. So we have lots of homes that maybe were built without insulation. Sometimes when you pull open a wall in an old house, there might be newspaper stuffed in there or random stuff that because people were kind of making this up as they went along. And so there are a ton of opportunities, particularly around insulation and air sealing in our homes, and it's why I always kind of go, hey, it's a really good idea to think about that home energy audit that can help you be more energy efficient. Next slide. The other piece that I think is important to emphasize in these opportunities for homes is the solar piece. So here in Dane County, we're lucky. We have a really vibrant solar market. That top map up there is, a local engineer in Madison got solar on his house and he started noticing it on a bunch of other houses. So he ran a program against the permit data and he found all the houses that had solar and made a map. Which is just, I love our community. And the bottom map is a map that we keep track of solar we're aware of at the kind of business or nonprofit level kind of thing. But it gives you a sense of how, so we have hundreds of installations. You should hit the button again because we have one of the really important things for me to always mention on the solar side for individuals thinking about solar on their home, that can be kind of intimidating because you don't necessarily know a bunch of people who've done solar to ask for advice. There is a group buy program called Madison, S-U-N, and it is led by the city of Madison, but at Dane County, we actually sponsor the program so that people anywhere in the county can participate. And essentially, it's some unbiased advice about solar and whether you're a good candidate, and then they actually every year pick one or more vendors who agree to set prices with them that are a little bit better than market rate so you can get a deal on your solar going through that program. And it's just a really nice opportunity if you haven't done this before and you don't know where to start. It's like you have a friend then to help you through that. So Madison is a really good resource there. And of course, with the solar, remember, you also can get the focus on energy rebates in addition to the federal tax credits. On all of these things, you can get the focus on energy incentives, which are, after all, money all of us pay in on our utility bills to have those programs, in addition to these new federal dollars. Next slide. On solar, I just like to give people a little bit of a sense, and you all have solar on your facility, so you know some of this, that when you put solar on a building, the default is that that electricity is going to be used by the building if it can be used by the building. If the building has something using electricity, that rooftop solar is going to flow to the building first. Then, if there is no use in the building, especially at the residential scale, that solar will run your meter backwards to the grid. So it will essentially give you a credit when you're producing more than you use, and then of course you'll take from the grid when it's like the grid is a big battery that gets more complicated for businesses because utilities have more rules about how that net metering works, but at the residential level, it's pretty straightforward. Next slide. The last thing I need to say about solar is it is a lot cheaper than it used to be. So we have, I was in a meeting the other day that someone said to me, well, we looked at solar, it was maybe 10 or 13 years ago. I'm like, then you didn't look at solar. That's like saying we looked at big screen TVs 10 or 15 years ago, and they cost $5,000, and now they're, so much cheaper. That's the case here. And the thing to look at here is the gray bar, which is the module. Okay, so the modules back in 2010 cost $250, and now they cost 50 cents a watt. And I can tell you that's real. We installed solar at our house in 2008, and I remember a friend in the industry telling me, Kathy, $350 a watt, you are getting such a great deal. And I try not to show that graph to my husband because it's like, wow, that's what it is to be an early adopter sometimes. But so now the costs, this goes through 2020, this is national data from the Department of Energy. Costs have gone up a little bit since 2020 with all of the supply chain things and all of the complexity and all the inflation happening, but solar is still a really good deal compared to where it was a decade ago. So I just threw a residential example in here, a pretty typical size of a system in Wisconsin is a 7 kilowatt array, which would deliver about 9,500 kilowatt hours of electricity. That's about what a typical home in Wisconsin uses. Now, I will tell you, my home uses about 3,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, and we have a big TV, and we have computers, and all of that stuff too. There's a range there about how you think about how much stuff is on and how efficient stuff is in your house. And that affects how big of a system you need. That's why that energy efficiency is important. So for a 7 kW array, the average cost, this is maybe about a year old, would be $24,000 for the system, but after you take the tax credit and the focus on energy rebate, you're down to $16,300. In our area, the electric savings from that would be about $1,500 the first year. As electric rates go up, that number would increase. So that's about a 10-year payback. There are things that are going to go faster than that. If you can make a system more efficient, that payback might well be shorter than that, but that kind of gives you an idea of the sort of the ballpark of those numbers right now. The other piece for individuals that's really important to talk about in terms of tax credits is the electric vehicle incentive. And so this too has been extended for 10 years. Now, previously we had an electric vehicle incentive that was tied to how many EVs that manufacturer had sold. So once they sold 200,000, the incentive started going away. Now it's tied to the battery components and how the vehicle is made, essentially. That makes this a little bit complicated because every 6 months, the IRS is going to re-examine that and update their list of the vehicles that qualify. And so it is really important to look at the lists that are online of which vehicles currently qualify. The other thing that isn't getting enough attention here that's really important is, so there are these battery component rules, but if you lease a car instead of buying it, all of those rules go away and you just get the full credit. And essentially that's because when people were negotiating this law, they didn't change the rules in all the places in the tax code. There's a different, when you lease a vehicle, essentially the dealership buys it, so it's a commercial sale, and then they lease it to you. And so it's a different set of rules, and yeah. The other important thing about the new EV incentive is that in 2024, the Department of Energy is working with car dealerships to make that instant at the point of purchase. So instead of having to wait the year until you file your taxes, you would get it off the vehicle price at the dealership. We haven't heard any details about that yet, but that's what they're saying.
We're waiting on that, and your slide says it's a rebate. Will it be a rebate or will it be a tax credit, or do we not know?
Well, so we're calling it more of a rebate because there's not really a way the federal government can issue you a tax credit through it will. So the question was the question was that will that be a tax credit or a rebate when it's instant? And it's just a little murky. We haven't seen the full rules on this, but I think it's going to look like a rebate to you. It's going to come off the purchase price. Yeah.
Well, our concern is because we're both retired, we don't have we don't owe taxes. So a credit isn't going to apply.
Yeah, you should talk to a tax advisor as retirees. I really think it's worth talking to somebody who can look at your situation, because it's complicated enough that I don't want to say, oh, I think this is how this will work there. I think the instant is a better option for you probably, but it's still going to be a little tricky. Yeah.
Please clarify. This is a tax credit based on the taxes that you owe, which is completely separate from your rebate or what you have to pay back to the government at the end of the year. So if you have, X thousand dollars of income, and therefore your tax burden is Y thousand, you may or may not have to pay anything or get any sort of a refund, but it's that smaller tax burden that this actually affects, right? Or is counted against?
It's counting against the total tax burden, not whether or not it's not what you've paid in, it's that, if you made $50,000 and your tax burden is, I'm making this all up, $5,000, that's your tax liability. That's the total you owe. Whether half of that was removed from your payroll as a tax, or all of it, or none of it, that's the tax burden kind of thing. And
Bill,
so when you're a retiree, you don't necessarily have a tax burden in the same way, depending on what income you're having, and you might have around some sources, but you might not, which is why I say it's a good idea to talk to somebody who knows, who can dig into your situation. The other piece of the EV thing is that for the first time, there's a credit for used EVs, a $4,000 credit for used EVs. And for both of these tax credits, there are high income qualifications. So individuals who make more than $150,000, and maybe that makes households like $250,000 or something, cannot get the tax incentive. You also can't get the tax credit if you buy a $200,000 Porsche, and because the federal government is trying to go, okay, we're trying to move this market, but there are people who are going to do things whether they get a credit or not, and let's focus on giving the money. So they're trying to make that all a little bit more maybe equitable in some ways. Next slide. So in addition to all of that stuff we've talked about for individuals, there are also credits for businesses, and importantly, especially here when we're in a church, there are, for the first time, direct pay options for non-taxable entities, including nonprofits and local governments. So a faith community would fall into that. And what this direct pay is so historically businesses could get these credits for doing like solar, but a nonprofit couldn't because they didn't pay taxes, exactly the sort of question so Congress made up this new thing they're calling direct pay, where a nonprofit will be able to file a form with the US Treasury that says, we did a solar project. In total, it cost $100,000. Please send our 30% tax credit to this checking account. And so I always want to be really clear about the direct pay. This is not a federal grant you're applying for where you have to fill out 400 pieces of paper and promise to fill out 400 more every quarter for the rest of your life. You're going to fill out one set of forms and you're going to get the payment. Now, the details for direct pay are not yet on the IRS website, but we're waiting for that. And we've got local entities who have projects that are going to qualify for this that we're aiming, again, my job is to make this easy. So as an example, the Village of McFarland is building a public safety building that will be net zero energy. It has both geothermal and solar. They're going to get between $800,000 and $1 million on this direct pay thing that they didn't know about when they committed to that project. Because sometimes karma works with us and we have really good things happen to good people. So we've been talking to them about, hey, as soon as you're ready and the form is out there, we want you to file, and then we're going to do a webinar about how much fun that filing was and what things you learn and that other people should know, because that'll help 10 other people make the filing more easy. And and we might do that with 3 entities before we decide, yeah, we've got enough that folks know how to do this. So the direct pay is still kind of pending. But so again, on the commercial side, the solar is really this terrific opportunity because you get the 30% and the direct pay happens. Energy efficiency is a tax deduction here, not a tax credit. It's a little bit more complicated to do. The EV incentives happen here for commercial entities, and interestingly, so a couple interesting things, the $7,500 credit can apply to things like commercial riding lawnmowers, electric forklifts, like non-road vehicles that are, I don't know, they have some weird term for that in the IRS world. It's like motorized, movable things, Those things can apply for that 30% tax credit up to $7,500, and the $40,000 is for more heavy-duty vehicle kinds of things. So you might have a minibus that an organization uses to move people around or something that they'll be able to get that credit for. And again here, you've got the opportunity to layer all of this with focus on energy, and on the business side, we have this thing called property assessed clean energy financing that lets you borrow money against your assessment and essentially set up that the savings are greater than your loan payments so that you're positive cash flow from the beginning of the project is sort of another option that's out there for both nonprofits and for-profits. As long as you own your facility, you can do PACE. And so I want to just close by saying, so again, we've got this website and other things that are going to help you sort of figure all of this out. The Focus on Energy website we send people to a lot. Focus on Energy has lists of what they call trade allies, vendors who will do home energy audits or install a heat pump or solar or whatever you're interested in. And then there's this national site, Rewiring America, that we're all kind of into now, because you can put into that site your zip code, your tax filing status, and your the size of your household, and it will estimate what you could get on different tax credits and what you could get on. That might be worth checking out. I'm not sure if it will totally, but it might not be hurt to play with. And if you just search, I know it's linked on our site, or Rewiring America IRA calculator, it's kind of popular, so it should pop up. Okay, and I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay,
So let's
thank you,
talk
Kathy.
about your questions.
Michael, do we have any Zoom questions?
Not so far.
Not so far, okay. Who has any questions here?
So if you were someone who is hoping to take action soon, what would you recommend for, like, the first few things to take a look at? Since some of these things aren't actually, like, if we got a heat pump this year, apparently it would not.
You
Get-
couldn't get the
yeah.
rebate. You could get the tax credit right now, but not the rebate, because the rebate
Okay.
program isn't up and running yet. Yeah, the place that I'm really encouraging people to start with is an energy audit. Is have, if you haven't had an energy audit in the last 4 or 5 years, you probably should have an energy audit. And what that means is someone is going to come into your house. They're going to look at insulation levels some places, but they're also going to do this thing called a blower door test, where they put this giant fan on your front door and essentially blow air out of your house at a really high intensity and see how much leaks back in. So let me tell you a blower door test. I used to live in a house on the northeast side of Madison, in a neighborhood near Oscar Mayer. I will never forget the day one of my friends in that realm brought his blower door over to do a blower door test at my house. So he put the blower door on the front door, and he turned it on, and there was kind of this bang, and he's like, okay, something happened upstairs, Kathy, because the readings are like really not good. And I went upstairs, and I had these weird, it was like a story and a half, I had these weird knee wall kind of like cupboards into the side of all of the doors had blown open on all of them. Because there was so much air coming through the house that he was like, yeah, to get an accurate reading, you're gonna have to block those so they stay shut while we try to, and that house is in a neighborhood with 100 other houses that were all built in 1925 to 1930 that I'm pretty sure were all built the same way. I mean, so that means there was a lot of air leakage there. It was like, holy cow. And so that's where you're not going to find that. Again, I grew up in drafty houses. I thought this is how houses worked. Then I was like, wow, this is like a lot better when it's not this drafty.
What's a typical audit cost?
So I think you should be prepared that it's probably $400 to $500, and you're going to get a 30% credit back up to $150 from the feds on the tax credit for it. Yeah, they're going to spend 2 to 3 hours at your house doing this. You're going to get a report with a bunch of, it's kind of cool now because everything's so digital. So you get like a cooler report than I got back in the day where there were maybe 2 Polaroids taped to the paper. That was a special, yeah. But so really, I think no matter what you think you might else want to do, it's just good to get an energy audit and see, okay, what's going on. Now, the audit is mostly going to focus on the shell and the heating and cooling systems. It's going to look at, some safety issues with your water heater and some of that. The thing it's not going to necessarily do is look at your plug load. Remember I said the typical house, uses 9,500 kilowatt hours, and my house uses about 3,000, about a third of that. So at our public libraries, you can check out a thing called a watt meter that you can take home, and you can plug into the wall and plug any appliance into it, and it will tell you how much electricity that appliance is using. Because if you're using 9,500 kilowatt hours, you've probably got some wasteful things there. And let me give you a couple of examples of things that are really wasteful. So if you have old cable boxes or DVD players that when you look at it, the whole top is ventilation, like it's all little, okay, that means it gets really hot and it means it's really inefficient. Some of those DVD players use as much electricity as a refrigerator. Now, the good news about the DVD players is if it's a DVD player from your cable company, you can call them and say, I want a new energy efficient box, and they will give you one for free. Because a few years ago, they cut a deal with the federal government to do that, to replace those. Now, they're not proactively telling you that, but if you reach out, I mean, and I don't know, we're all streaming, but I think lots of us still have cable, and you might have, some people have 3 or 4 of those DVD players attached to different TVs in different rooms. And it's like, so you've got the equivalent of what, 6 refrigerators in your house? Holy cow, no wonder you're using so it's like they're figuring out, okay, where are those really wasteful appliances that, another classic thing in our market is you might have 1 or more dehumidifiers in your basement that is frosted up but still plugged in, and so still sucking a lot of electricity, but it might not be doing anything to defrost the basement. And, maybe in your head you were thinking, well, yeah, I know it's not really working, but whatever. But if it's still plugged in, it might well just be wasting electricity while it's not doing anything. The final wasteful one here is those second and third refrigerators in the garage and the basement. The ones, and the worst refrigerators, there are 2 really bad sets of them. One is the old, like, Harvest Gold, avocado green, the 70s era, before we had any energy standards. Those things use 3 to 4 times as much electricity as a newer model, or as a tinier, older model. The really old 50s ones, those were more efficient than, there was just a moment there in that avocado green moment where apparently we thought electricity would be free one day, because they're just, if you have to have a second refrigerator, get one that's a lot more efficient. The other units that are really inefficient, surprisingly, are a bunch of the dorm size units, because for a long time there were no standards about how efficient those had to be. And guess what, when you take one to a college camp, nobody was really accountable for the electricity around that. So those can be really inefficient, and we end up reusing them after our kids are out of college in what seem like innocuous ways. But again, that little fridge could be using more electricity than your big fridge in the kitchen. And, that's kind of just like, really? Is that what, so a watt meter would let you figure some of that out and sort of, with the thing I'll say about a refrigerator and a watt meter, because a refrigerator cycles, if you're going to put a watt meter on it to measure it, you should put it on for like a whole day or something. You can't do it in 5 minutes the way you can do with some other appliances, because it's just weird. But yeah, so that's where I would go with I would do both of those audit things. I would sort of try to, and maybe the other thing about the electrification side of this, so if you have access to children, and I find 7 to 11-year-olds super, super helpful in this. This can be like a day's activity, Here's a watt meter, let's go around the house and find all of the things that are using more energy than we want them to. I find they're super happy if they can find things in their siblings' bedrooms that are culprits, it's just becomes a little bit, but they're at a point where they can do some of the math, and it's an interesting, I'm solving problems where I can tell the adults in my life what they should be doing differently. They're not past the joy of that yet.
I had a question. So I recently installed or had the box seals in my basement insulated. Does that qualify? And I also had a new picture window and new storm door and new screen door put on. Do any of those qualify?
Yeah, so the doors and windows, if they're Energy Star qualified, should qualify. You want to verify that with them. And the box ceiling should under the insulation piece, yeah. Yeah, so all of that should be eligible for, yeah.
We have a Zoom question. It says, you mentioned that you use about 1/3 the amount of energy than the calculation for the average Wisconsin need. Is there support to help size to the needs for any given home?
Yeah, I think the question is about the solar piece of this, that, obviously when a solar installer is talking to you about an installation for your home, they're always going to want to see your electric bills. They're going to want to know what your consumption is. And as a rule, they're going to want to install a system that's maybe 80 to 90% of that consumption, so that it's largely covering everything. One of the things we see is that when people install solar and they start seeing in some months they have a credit from the utility because they made more than they used, people become a lot more conscious of their electric usage. And sometimes that can spur some more efficiency there, so like trying to kind of give you a little bit of space to reduce your consumption there. But yeah, an installer is always going to want to help you have a system that largely meets your needs, but doesn't create, when we talk about the net metering, that's not infinite. So if you put a huge system on your house and had a little bit of usage, the utility is not going to pay you retail rates unlimited. It's largely up to your consumption level, kind of roughly, not so you don't want to become a power producer at the be paid 4 cents wholesale rates kind of thing. That's not a bargain for most of us. We're not creating electricity at the scale that's cost effective kind of thing. So an installer would totally support you on that, yeah.
Is there a list of vendors? We're thinking about our heating and cooling system, and although we use a company that we really like and trust, they aren't helpful with energy conservation stuff.
Yeah, so Focus on Energy has vendor lists for HVAC, for energy assessments. I've had some conversations with them. They are working on having a list about the HVAC contractors who are promoting heat pumps and are installing heat pumps to kind of, because a lot of times now when people are thinking, I want a more efficient heating and cooling system, they're interested in heat pumps. And so I don't have a sense of how fast that is going to happen, but I know Focus knows that we want a list that tells us who installs heat pumps over just who does HVAC. Maybe the extra thing I'll say there, so this morning actually, our office was part of an event with a bunch of HVAC manufacturers and distributors and contractors. We had about 100 people in a room today talking about heat pumps in Dane County and how this is a place where we have a lot of early adopters, we have a lot of people interested in climate change. This market is going to, people want heat pumps. And I do think, like, we made some progress, that there were contractors in the room who came into the room saying, well, I don't know that we're ever going to install those, who left going, okay, this really is where the industry's going, and we need to get the training, and we need to shift so that's not going to happen overnight, but certainly our office is doing active things out there in the market. I mean, I stood in that room today and I said to those contractors that my goal was that when they left, that they would include a heat pump option in every proposal they wrote. I said it doesn't have to be the only option, but let customers know what you can do in that space. And, kind of implying, look, some portion of the people in the room are going to do that. And they might be the ones who win the bids. So trying to move that needle. I know it's an issue in our market, and that's how I represented it. I said, I go to meetings and people tell me they can't find a contractor who will do heat pumps. We have to make this better in our market. So it's not perfect, but it also, the other thing I should say about this is when people have trouble finding a contractor, it's really helpful if you ping our office and tell us, hey, I've talked to 4 contractors and none of them wanted, because sometimes I can help hook you up with someone else, but I can also tell all these friends I have in the industry now that, hey, this is still happening. There are people who want this technology who are having trouble finding vendors. And, you know, when I tell those stories to the manufacturers or even the distributors, the people who are trying, you know, further up that supply chain, when I say there are households in Dane County with their checkbooks open and they just can't find anyone to take their money, that kind of makes the manufacturers crazy. They're like, but we have products. And I'm like, okay, let's make this system work better. And the other thing I should say though, from the contractor side of this, so for an HVAC contractor, what they want is to deliver you a product that makes you happy enough to recommend them to others and that doesn't ever cause you to call them and say, we're cold. And they're a little cautious about anything new because that's the risk. That what if you don't adjust to the different way this works and you're really unhappy? And so part of it is helping them know how to have that conversation with customers so that they help you understand this is what's different about a heat pump. So let me give you a really tangible example. A furnace blows out air at like 180 degrees into your ducts. A heat pump blows out air at about 120 degrees into your ducts. If you have a room in your house where you have like this really comfy chair and it's exactly next to a vent that blows that warm air on you, you are not going to like a heat pump over your furnace because that air is going to feel cool. Now, overall, the room temperature is going to be fine, but there's a big difference between blowing 180 degree air out of a vent and 120 degree air out of a vent. That's the kind of thing that a contractor has to talk through with somebody and go, well, okay, I happen to live in a house where all of our vents, for whatever reason, are high on the ceiling. Like, nobody has a chair that has warm air blowing over it. So that isn't a big deal for us. But at my mother-in-law's house, it would have been untenable to put in a heat pump because she very much had a chair that the warm air blew on her, kind of. So there's, like, it's nuanced, but we need to get to a place where these conversations are sort of moving us forward in the way that folks want.
Great. Are we running out of time on Zoom? No. Okay. Anybody else have any other questions? Wonderful.
Thank you.
I wonder, could you say a few words about deep energy retrofits? Like our house, we got an energy audit, and I looked at our gas usage and stuff, and we're using about 6 or 7 times as much energy as a passive house would.
Yeah.
I should say 6 or 7 times the maximum allowed by the passive house standard. One thing that is very disappointing to me is that if I go to MG&E's website and I punch in an address for a house that's like 2 years old and I look at its gas usage, it's essentially the same as my 27-year-old house. So our builders are not evolving their techniques. They're not making our homes any more efficient now than they were 25 years ago plus. And especially if you're thinking about getting a heat pump, you have to be prepared financially for some larger bills because, even though a heat pump for for a given kilowatt hour of energy consumed by the heat pump, it's going to move ideally at least 2 or 3 in the
Right.
winter. That's still not going to overcome the cost difference between a kilowatt hour of electricity and a therm of gas. So you're going to probably,
Right.
even though you're using much less energy, you're going to be paying a lot more than
You're
you
gonna,
would for
you're,
gas.
right now, if you're buying natural gas right now to heat your home, you are not, well, depending on how much cooling you do, because the heat pump does your cooling too, and it does your cooling quite a bit more efficiently than your central air now. So you're gonna save some money in the summer, but you for the year, you are gonna probably pay more if you're in an all-electric heat pump situation today. Now, gas prices gyrate, and so, we'll see where that goes. If, by contrast, you heat with propane today, you will save money to go to an all-electric heat pump, because propane is a factor more expensive than natural gas kind of thing. But there's a continuum there. And yeah, we talk about this idea of deep energy retrofits, that how do we take existing buildings and make them really, really efficient? And, so that's about a lot of insulation and air sealing. It's about really effective equipment in that building. And sometimes it's possible and sometimes it's not possible. It's interesting, in other countries, they're doing, the Dutch are doing some experiments where they're essentially adding, I think it's 6 to 8 inches of insulation to the exterior of buildings. So they're like putting a big styrofoam thing around, and now your windows are inset, and it's like there's some complexity to this, but as a way to super insulate homes and increase their efficiency. And I mean, it's funny, I had a colleague who suggested that to me 15 years ago, and I was like, Wayne, no one would do that, and now the Dutch are doing it, because that's sort of what many things Wayne said that was true of. So there's like, Jill talked about getting her box seals done. They're to be super efficient, there would have been a different way your basement was insulated, outside of the basement. Well, that's not very practical to fix now that, so there is this challenge about how far can we take our existing buildings. One of the things we see in the new construction is that there is an incremental improvement in efficiency, but our homes keep getting bigger. And so, like, one of the last analyses I saw of this, it was like and this is like 15 years old probably, the new homes were like 20% more efficient and 22% larger. So the usage was largely the same, because you've got more square footage you're heating and cooling. And all of that factors into this, I love that you're using the MG&E website. So for people who don't know, on MG&E's website, under their My Account features, you can, I think he's gonna you can log into your own account, and you'll get these cool graphs that sort of, you can put in your square footage and the year your house was built, and it'll show you a comparison of other homes built about the same time. How much usage are you having compared to those homes? Yeah, and there's also a feature, and this is true on Alliance site as well as MG&E site, there's a feature where, because our market has so much rental housing, utilities are required to provide the energy use of rental housing upon request. And that's that would be like a huge hassle if they had to respond to all of those things. So there's a spot on the MG&E website where you can type in an address, and unless the person in that house has opted out, you can see the average energy consumption of that house. This is like 14 years ago, there was a neighborhood in Madison that had a neighborhood green team, and they pulled the data for all the houses in the neighborhood, and then they went door to door to talk to people about their energy usage. It was kind of awkward Because people were a little bit like, why are you at my door telling me about my energy usage? This seems a little like I think it needed a little more setup. But there's something very influential there. So there are programs in other parts of the country where people get in their utility bill a statement that says, you use this and that compares to this average usage of your neighbors. And research tells us that actually gets people to conserve energy. If you know you're using more than other people in your neighborhood, you're motivated. Yeah, so this is the part where you just pick an address and this is what it will show you. The kind of high and the low and the monthly average for the last 12 months for heating and cooling. Yeah. It's kind of a fun, yeah. I think you probably have to be an energy geek to think this is fun, but and there are not a lot of places in the country where this data is online in this way. Like people from other places are always surprised when I go, oh, but you can just, so one of my fun things about this is like if you have moved to a different house in MG&E's territory, you can look at the usage of your old house and see how the new people are doing there versus how you did there. But then, okay, I might be an energy geek. There was a point where I did that and it disturbed me how much energy they were using, and then my husband had to tell me I was not allowed to keep driving by to see what they were doing to use that much. I'm like, I think, there's something wrong. They're doing. He's like, you cannot intervene in this. It's not your thing. But yeah, that. So yeah, some really good tools there to help you get a sense of, okay, should I be, if your gas usage is higher, that's a sign that this is a building shell stuff to do. If your electric consumption is higher, I would start with the plug load stuff and just go, okay, do we have some weird, I think about someone I knew who went on a quest for that, and it turned out that they had an old TV in the guest room in the basement that, was just old enough that it just used a lot of energy when it was off. Older TVs do that. And so she put it on a power strip and turned off the power strip. And she was like, when the kids are going to come visit, I'll turn it on the day before so it, gets all its channels back. That was a pretty good chunk of the piece she couldn't find was that TV in that guest room that was just old enough to be really inefficient.
Yeah, so I just I put in my house, and you'll see monthly average 57 therms, and I just went to this home in Terra Vesa, and that Terra Vesa neighborhood, they didn't break ground until 2019.
Okay.
And I just picked a home at random, and this is actually smaller. This is only 1,700 square feet. My house is 2,000. Their monthly average is 62 therms.
Yeah.
Minus 50. So they're
pretty
using
close, but they're smaller than you.
Smaller than me, 25-year newer house, same amount of gas consumption.
Yeah.
That's just wrong.
Yeah. Well, there is diminishing returns. I mean, so I was at Focus on Energy in the beginning, starting in 2001, and we worked with local builders to do a lot to make homes better. So that's not, your home is older than that. So I have less explanation for that, maybe it's possible you have a really good home that was,
Our next door neighbors have similar gas usage to
Okay.
ours.
Well, yeah, we keep our house at 62 and 57. I think. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think there was a layer of innovation and efficiency. Oh, the other thing I should say about this is part of this story is about building codes. So in Wisconsin right now, our residential building code, the minimum you have to meet to construct a house is based on the 2009 International Energy Conservation Code. So we haven't increased our building code in 14 years. You know, the code has increased, but we haven't gone through the process in Wisconsin to say you have to, and actually, it's a relevant thing to talk about here because there are also under the Inflation Reduction Act incentives for builders to build net zero energy homes, to build really efficient homes. And because our code is really old, the leap to those standards is pretty big. I've had builders tell me that, well, if Wisconsin's code would increase, it would be easier for us to go after those incentives because it wouldn't be this huge jump that we're now in, you know. So we're the State Department of Safety and Professional Services, who is responsible for the codes, is like in the process of updating the codes, but it's been, and that will require legislative approval to happen. So we'll see what gets done there, but the codes are a piece of the story of what you're observing is that they haven't changed because consumers can't drive this market. I mean, you know, nobody can like follow their builder around and we have efficiency programs that do some certification of those new homes, but regular folks can't discern, is that house more efficient than this? You know, it's hard for the market to do this, which is part of why codes are so important to sort of protect everyone. And our codes haven't kept pace in a lot of ways. I mean, Minnesota homes are a lot more efficient than our homes right now, and that didn't used to be the case.
And you haven't explicitly said it yet, but when you're saying that Wisconsin building codes, it's also true that no local municipality can require developers to
Right.
build to anything more stringent than the state codes.
Right. You cannot, right. A local community cannot set higher codes than the state code. Now, we're starting to see communities do other creative things in this space, not necessarily on the residential side, but a good example is Middleton, where so communities, cities have these tax incremental financing districts where they give entities a deal for building in those areas. Middleton, for a while now, essentially to get TIF approved, you had to do solar on your building. They're now talking about, to get TIF, you have to build a net zero energy ready building. That's because we have these climate goals. And, you know, they're getting some pushback from people saying we won't build in Middleton, and they're like, well, we have climate goals. If you build something that's inefficient that makes our climate, like, it's not good policy for us to encourage you. Why would, you know, you can build somewhere else in Middleton outside the TIF area. We can't stop you from building something that's just at code, but we're not going to reward you for building something just at code because that reward is something that is up to them to give. You know, so it's being really creative about how do we use whatever tools we still have in our toolbox.
I'm glad to hear that, and I'd like
Yeah.
to see if I
Yeah.
can get a contact with the city
Yep,
of Middleton,
yep.
because I'm actually Fitchburg's newest alder,
Oh.
and I had suggested is exactly what you just said. Yes, we can't
Yeah.
require builders to do anything fancier than minimum
Right,
code, but
right.
maybe we can say, hey,
Yeah.
if you want to take some of
Yeah,
those sweet
we've
tip
got,
dollars.
so one of the things our office does is we with the city of Madison, host a group we call the Sustainability Leaders Collaborative, which is essentially cities, towns, villages, and school districts in the county coming together to learn from each other around these things. And so we actually have a webinar of the Middleton people talking about everything, including the TIF, and I can, hook you up with that as here you go. Here they are saying that this is what they're doing. I'd very much like to see other communities adopt that, because it's
Well,
like one
yeah,
of the
I mean,
few things you can do given what you can't do. It's, you know, it's challenging. We've got these local governments with really ambitious climate goals, and it's hard to realize those goals with, you know, without a lot of tools that communities in other places get. You know, one of the things that you might experience as an alder is folks who are concerned about climate issues will see an article in the news about some cool thing Seattle is doing or somewhere else, New York City is doing that around reducing emissions. And unfortunately, much of the time you're going to say, we're not allowed to do that in Wisconsin, which is a not very satisfying thing for the public to hear. It's true, but not, you know, it's like, but this is really cool, they will say to me, and I will say, it is really cool, but we are not allowed to do that. You know, there are state laws that say we can't, you know, push these things in certain ways.
I think in 2018, would that have been Bill de Blasio? Whoever mayor of New York was at the time was one of, I don't know, a few dozen mayors in cities worldwide who pledged that every new building constructed in the city will have to be net zero by 2030, and every pre-existing building will have to be net zero by 2050. And yeah, I don't know if
There are some pretty major, like, initiatives happening in New York City around, like, okay, these buildings have to start meeting these benchmarks, but I don't know either what their overall progress is. But, you know, there's something to be said for setting a target and measuring progress against it, because just wishing that we were using less energy and emitting less greenhouse gas emissions isn't a terribly effective strategy. I mean, wishful thinking is, like, not very high on my list of, like, how we get it done. Okay. You guys have really good questions. I'm like, wow. Well, I've been doing this a long time. It's, yeah.
In order to thank you,
Oh.
we have some energy efficient gifts, including some
wow.
handmade gift bags, and that we'd like to
look at
offer you.
that.
So
Thank you so
you're
much.
welcome.
That's really sweet.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.